I know almost nothing about the Armenian Genocide, and it also seems to be particularly controversial because, unlike the Holocaust, it seems to me, just from hearsay and the way it comes up in the news, that there's a very sizable group of people who deny that it occurred. So, what is the story here, and why does it allow for this level of controversy?
Okay, so there are a number of dimensions to trying to answer that question. First of all, denial is built into genocide. Almost every people who commit genocide deny it, including white folks in the United States who denied what happened to Indians for a long time, right? And there's still some who do. Or Australians who denied that anything bad happened to Aborigines, or Canadians who denied that anything happened badly to the First Peoples, as they're called, and so on. So denial is all part of it. People deny genocide almost when it's created. I mean, even Hitler in the Second World War denied genocide. Even though he was secretly proud of it, he wouldn't publicly say, "I'm proud of the fact, that I killed all these Jews." Instead, he would deny it. And, they tried to cover it up as well. I don't know if you know that, but they tried to cover up genocide, dig up the bodies afterwards, rebury them, burn them, rebury them, scatter the ashes so nobody would find them. In the case of the Armenian genocide, the Turks, for a lot of different reasons, continued it. And when I say Turks, I have to be careful because it's the Turkish government in particular, and some Turkish politicians and intellectuals on the right deny the Armenian genocide. You'd be surprised how many regular old Turks know exactly what happened and don't deny the Armenian genocide. By the way, there's no controversy in scholarly circles whether there was an Armenian genocide or not. There are some scholars who will write denialist literature. We've got them in this country too. And they do it for some perverse reason, in my view, having to do sometimes with ties, even financial ties to the Turkish government. But, the vast bulk of scholars, I mean, sometimes they don't like to use the word genocide for reasons I've suggested to you earlier, but they all know what happened to the Armenians, which is they were wiped out, right? Everybody knows that. And the Turks, again, will engage in various forms of denial. In this country, in the West, most countries, even states have resolutions that say, about the Armenian genocide. In California, certainly, which has a big Armenian American community. So there's denial is part of the story, and you just have to deal with it. It's just one of those things for a lot of different reasons that we could talk about, having to do with Turkish society, Turkish memory, Turks' sense of self. They think of themselves, and they usually are wonderfully hospitable, lovely, delightful, generous people. That's how they like to think of themselves. And so how could we commit genocide? It's not possible. Right? So there's denial. But most scholars understand that this is not the case. And, what happened in 1915 is it's a cumulative story of increasing antagonism between both the Armenian and the Turkish communities in the Ottoman Empire as it entered into World War I. That's an important part of the story, the context of World War I, the fact that the Turks had lost a lot of territory in the Balkans and were feeling put upon by the West, the fact that they had allied with the Germans in World War I and the Germans didn't care very much about what was happening, the fact that the Armenians were seen as allies of the Western allies, especially of the Russians, who were part of the Western alliance with Britain and France. And the Armenians were seen as sympathetic to the Russians. I mean, some of them were. The Armenians also, by the way, saw trouble coming. Some of them armed themselves. There were some uprisings. I mean, the Armenians fought, but a little bit like I was describing with the indigenous peoples who fought. If you fought, then the anger and the resentment and the hatred of the authorities was even more, and so they came down on the Armenians in 1915. This is after the beginning of World War One, when things were not looking very good for the Turks. They came down hard on the Armenians as a kind of traitor people. There was some racism involved. I mean, there was a kind of Turkism, a pan-Turkism that also contributed to that racism. There was anti-Christian feelings involved, which had developed in a very powerful way. There were also Greeks in the Ottoman Empire who were driven out, many of them killed. Syriac Christians who were attacked, many of them killed, also could be considered a genocide. And so, this all came to a head. There was a kind of collective state of mind among the leadership, the Young Turk leadership, which was actually modern and made up of a lot of doctors and army officers and that sort of thing. And they just decided that's it. So they're going to deport the Armenians, out of the eastern Anatolia where they lived, in central Anatolia and Istanbul or Constantinople at the time. And they were going to deport them, across Anatolia into Mesopotamia, where they were going to then die, probably. And the Turkish government knew they would die there because, again, we were dealing with the problem of food. We're dealing about a trek across the desert where they were given no food or water or very little. And they died in huge numbers. The Armenians died in huge numbers. And it soon became a deportation of all the Armenians, pretty much. And, we don't know. The numbers are disputed. Most Armenian scholars will say about 1.5 million Armenians were killed in the Armenian Genocide. Some will say the lowest number is about 800,000. The Turks say, maybe 80,000 died or 60,000 died, but it was their own fault, that kind of thing. They attacked us, and therefore, we had to deal with them. It was a terrible destruction, of the Ottoman Armenian community. And then, the scattering of the Armenians all over. I mean, then many left, scattered all over the world, to the United States, to France, to Britain, to Lebanon, as a way to escape, this terrible genocide. So there's not really much of an argument among American scholars about this, among scholars of genocide. There are some Turkish historians who will say, no, there wasn't a genocide. That's not right. And then there are a few who will say, well, let's not call it a genocide. Let's call it, deportation and massacre, that together. But on the whole, I think there's a real consensus that's developed. And by the way, not just among among American, Armenian scholars, and European scholars, but among many Turkish scholars who are not allowed to talk about it, and who keep quiet generally now about it because you can get in trouble. There was a time when you could go to jail. I don't think that's true anymore. But it's interesting, there's still an openness, I think, in Turkey to thinking about the Armenian Genocide. And this book that we edited with my colleagues Ran Suni and Fatma Muga Gocek on the Armenian Genocide, was published in Turkish. I mean, it was a number of years ago, it was 10 years ago, but still, that was a time when, in theory, they were denying the genocide, but you could still, every once in a while, publish something that could talk about the truth.